true.
She's right. You're wrong.
No, listen to me. He's twisting it.
Enough!
There is a sound in some marriages that everybody in the family has heard 10,000 times and nobody has ever asked about. It gets treated like weather. That's just how he is. That's just what she does. And because nobody asks, the sound goes right on making a wound for 30 or 40 years, while everybody stands around it being polite. On a Thursday afternoon in a television studio in Los Angeles, a 69-year-old man from the oil patch of southeastern New Mexico laughed out loud every single time his wife opened her mouth. And after about 40 minutes of it, Ray Calloway stopped the taping cold, walked the length of that stage, and asked him one word. Why, if you like stories about people who love each other and have been hurting each other for years without knowing it, hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. Because the answer that man gave took 9 seconds, and it emptied that building. There were grown men in the crew crying behind the cameras, and it did not fix one single thing, which is the part nobody talks about. And the part I want to tell you about most. Hobbs, New Mexico sits about 4 miles from the Texas line, out where the Calloway and the pump jacks start and don't stop. It is an oil town. It booms, and it busts, and it booms again. And the people who stay are the people who figure out how to be there in both halves of that. Tom's Fierro, called Tommy by everybody since about 1962, was 69 years old and had run Fierro Tire and Alignment on Marlin Boulevard for 41 years. Big hands, quiet man. The kind of man who fixes a flat for a woman at 9 at night and won't take the money and gets irritated if you bring it up later. His wife was Ramona Fierro, called Mona, 67, and Mona Fierro was a voice. That is the only way to explain it to somebody who is not from Lea County. For 22 years she announced the Lea County Fair. If you grew up out there, her voice is the sound of August, the barrel racing, the mutton busting, the 4-H auction, the whole thing. And for 31 years, every Thursday night, she called bingo at the Knights of Columbus Hall on Turner Street. 300 nights a year that woman had a microphone in her hand. She did numbers, she did jokes, she did the thing where she'd draw a ball and hold it, and look at the room and the whole hall would go quiet waiting on her. People in that town did not say Mona Fierro. They said, you know, the bingo lady. Everybody knew the voice before they knew the face. They married in 1979. 2 kids. Adriana, 43, called Andy, who works for the school district, and who filled out the application for the show 4 years running without telling her parents. Wakun, 40, called Jake, who works a workover rig, and who has not called his mother by anything but ma'am since he was 6. Mona's older sister Estella, 71, everybody calls her Stella, took the 5th podium. In March of 2010, Ramona Fierro was 51 years old, and she was standing at her own kitchen counter cutting a cantaloupe, and she had a stroke. She lived. She kept her right side. Mostly, she kept her mind, every bit of it, all the way through. Which is the part people get wrong about this. What she lost was the road between the thought and the mouth. Aphasia, 19 months of it. 19 months where the woman who was the voice of the Lea County Fair could not tell her husband what she wanted for supper. She knew. She knew every single time. She just could not get to the word. She would point. She would draw in the air with a finger. She'd get one word out, and it would be the wrong word, and she'd hear it come out wrong, and her face would go. And Tommy Fierro would sit there across the table with his hands flat on it, and wait, because he had been told by 4 different people not to finish her sentences, and he never did. Not one time. In 19 months. He closed the shop at 3 every day for a year and a half. He drove her to Lubbock and back, 2 hours each way, twice a week. He learned every word of what the therapist told him. He kept a spiral notebook of her words the way you keep track of a savings account, and on the bad weeks the number went down, and he did not say anything about it to anybody. There is one more thing about those 19 months that nobody outside that house knew until it came out on television. The spiral notebook Tommy kept was not a medical record. He wrote down every single word she got back, in the order she got it back, with the date beside it. Water, Andy. Coffee, hot no. The word no took her 4 months, and he underlined it twice, because the therapist in Lubbock had told him that the day she can tell you no is the day she's a person again, and not a patient. Her sister Stella found that notebook in a drawer in 2014, and read about 2 pages of it and put it back and did not tell anybody for 11 years. And in October of 2011, they were sitting in the front room with the news on, and a weatherman came on the screen in a suit that did not fit him. And Ramona Fierro said, out loud, clear as a church bell, all in one piece, that man does not own one shirt that fits him. Whole sentence. 19 months. Tommy Fierro laughed so hard he had to sit down on the kitchen floor. His daughter has told this story at 2 family weddings. He got up off the couch to go to her, and his legs quit, and he sat down on the linoleum in his work clothes and laughed until he was crying and could not tell her why. And she stood over him thinking he was having something happen to him too, and she kept saying his name, and every time she said it he laughed harder. That was October of 2011. He has laughed at every whole sentence that woman has said since. 15 years. Every one. Now here is the problem, and it is the whole story, so I want to lay it out plain. He never told her why. Not once. In 15 years. Because to say why, he would have to say the other part out loud, and Tom's Fierro has never said the word stroke in his life. Ask his kids. He says when your mother was sick. He says back that spring. He says before. His own family has watched him walk all the way around that word for 16 years like a man walking around a hole in the yard. So all Mona Fierro ever got was the sound. And a laugh, when you do not know what it is for, is one of the cruelest sounds there is. She would say something at church and hear him laugh 2 pews back. She would say something at the shop and hear it from the bay. At their daughter's wedding, in the middle of a toast she had written out on a card and practiced for 6 days. She got 4 sentences in and heard her husband laugh, and she folded the card and sat down. She thought he was laughing at how she sounded. She had every reason on God's earth to think that. She'd worked 2 years to get her words back, and she knew she did not sound the way she used to. And there was one person in the world who had heard every wrong word she ever said in those 19 months. And that person laughed every time she talked. In 2013, she quit calling bingo. She told them it was her hip. She has not announced the Lea County Fair since 2009. By the time this family walked out onto that stage, Ramona Fierro talked about 80% less than she used to. And she had a habit her family had never once asked about. Before she said anything in front of people. She said it once in her head first. Every sentence. Checked and loaded before it left the house. And when a word wouldn't come, she held up one finger, which everybody in that family read as hang on a second. It never meant hang on. It meant please don't walk away. Their opponents that day were the Tuyasosopo family of Carson, California. 7 feet of aunties, and a 62-year-old anchor named Fitu, who hugged everybody in the green room whether they wanted it or not. The taping started fine. Mona Fierro was good on camera. She was funny. She had that voice. A little slower than it used to be. A little more deliberate. And if you did not know the story you would just think, there's a lady who takes her time. She gave her first answer. Tommy Fierro laughed. The audience laughed with him, because that is what an audience does. And because a big quiet man laughing at his little wife looks like love from about 30 feet away. Ray Calloway smiled. It played. Second answer. He laughed. Third answer. He laughed. By the middle of the first round, the audience had stopped joining in. And there is a specific thing that happens in a studio when 200 people start noticing something at the same time. It gets very still in the cheap seats. Because it was every time. Not the funny ones. Every single time. She said a garden hose, and he laughed. She said her mother's name, and he laughed. Ray asked her how long she'd been married, and she said 47 years in November. And Tom's Fierro laughed out loud on national television. And 200 people watched his wife's shoulders come up around her ears about an inch. Andy Fierro, standing 2 podiums down from her father, said afterward that she had heard that sound her entire life, and had never once heard it from the outside. And that hearing it from the outside, with strangers listening, made her sick to her stomach. Ray Calloway kept it moving. He gave it every chance. He has said since that he spent that whole first round telling himself it was a nervous laugh. Because half the men who stand on that stage do something strange with their hands or their face. And it is not his business to make a federal case out of a nervous man. Then round 2 happened. Ray asked the family a table question, the soft kind, and he asked it to Mona because she was the one the room loved. He said, "Mrs. Fierro, tell me something about that town of yours that I wouldn't know." And Mona Fierro said, "Well, in August we have a fair." "And I used to," her husband laughed. And Ramona Fierro stopped in the middle of the word and said, "Never mind." 2 words, never mind. And she looked down at that podium and put both hands on it. Ray Calloway stopped the show. He did not raise his voice. He put his cards down on the podium rail and he said, "We're gonna hold up." The band stopped. The floor manager's arm went up. 200 people sat forward. He walked the whole length of that stage, past the 2 families, and he stood in front of Tom's Fierro, and he said one word. "Why?" Tommy Fierro said, "Sir, you've laughed at every word out of your wife's mouth since 2 o'clock this afternoon." Ray said, "I've been counting since about the 4th one and I quit at 19. I'm not going to stand up here and pretend I didn't hear it, and I'm not going to let this lady finish this show with her chin on her chest. So I'm asking you a straight question in front of God and this audience. Why do you laugh when your wife talks?" And Tom's Fierro, 69 years old, said, "I'd rather not." Ray said, "I know you'd rather not." The man's jaw was working. He looked at his wife and then he looked away from her, and he said, "Ask her about March of 2010. Which is not an answer. It is a door with somebody standing in front of it. Ramona Fierro said, in the flattest voice of her life, "I had a stroke." She said it like a woman reading off a form. Name, date of birth, "I had a stroke." She had said it 1,000 times in 16 years, and she thought that was the end of the conversation, and so did the audience, and there was that soft "oh" a room makes. But it was not the end of the conversation, and this is the part I need you to catch, because it is the whole hinge of this thing. That stroke was not a secret. Everybody in Hobbs knew. Her kids knew. The whole studio now knew. What was a secret was what the laugh was. Ray Calloway knew the difference. He said, "Ma'am, I'm sorry that happened to you and I'd like to hear about it in a minute. But that's not what I asked, and he knows it isn't." He turned back. "Sir, why do you laugh?" And Tommy Fierro said, "Because she can." Nobody understood it. You could feel the room not understand it. "Say that again," Ray said. "Because she can talk," he said. For 19 months my wife could not put a sentence together. Not one. Not to me, not to nobody. And in October of 2011, she come out with one whole one, sitting right there in the front room. And I sat down on the floor. And I ain't. He stopped and got himself. I've heard her say maybe 40,000 sentences since that one. Tom's Fierro said. I ain't got over the first one yet. That is the 9 seconds, that is the clip. 50 million people have watched a big man in a good shirt he bought for television say that he has not gotten over hearing his wife talk. But watch what happened next. Because this is where this hour got great instead of just sad. Ramona Fierro did not fall into his arms. She stood at that podium with tears coming straight down her face and she said, 15 years. He said, Mona, 15 years, Toms. Her voice came up. That voice. 200 people got about 4 seconds of what the Lea County Fair used to sound like. I quit bingo. Did you know that? I told them it was my hip. I quit because I could hear you 3 tables back. He said I didn't know. At Andy's wedding I sat down in the middle of my own toast. She said, you want to know what it sounds like from where I'm standing? It sounds like the one person that heard me when I couldn't get a word out thinks I still can't. And Tom's Fierro said, I never once thought that. You never once said anything, she said. And there it was, and Ray Calloway did not step on it. Stella Cordova, 71 years old, who had not said 4 words all afternoon, spoke up from the 5th podium. She said, Ramona, he's got a notebook. Her sister said, a what? He wrote them down. Stella said, every word you got back. I found it in the bottom drawer 11 years ago and I never said nothing because it wasn't mine, and I have been sick about it ever since. Mona Fierro looked at her husband and said, you wrote them down? And Tommy Fierro said, I had to. Some weeks the number went down. I didn't want to be the only one that knew when it went back up. He let it be true. He said, out loud to the audience, now don't nobody get comfortable. What that man just told y'all is beautiful, and it don't undo a thing. He's been carrying something good, and he been carrying it in a way that cost her 15 years. Both of those are true at the same time, and that's most marriages I ever met. Then he did the thing that nobody had ever seen this show do. He did not throw the man off the stage. He said, "Sir, you're staying right where you are. You keep your spot. You keep your family. You're gonna finish this game with them." And then he looked up at the booth and he said, "Kill his microphone." They killed it. For the rest of this round, Ray said, "You don't get a sound. Not one. You can laugh all you want. Nobody's gonna hear it." And they played on. And what happened over the next 11 minutes is the reason this episode is going to get taught in television classes for 20 years. Because that man could not stop. He tried. You can see him try. His wife would give an answer and his face would come apart, and his shoulders would go, and his eyes would shut, and he'd put a hand up over his mouth, and there was no sound at all. Nothing. Just a 69-year-old man silently coming undone every time his wife said a word, in a studio quiet enough to hear the air handlers. Take the sound away and everybody in that building could finally see his face. It was not mockery. There was not one thing in it that was mockery. 200 people watched that man's face for 11 minutes and there was not a person left in that room who thought he was laughing at her. And there had not been one person in that room who thought otherwise 40 minutes before, and the only thing that changed was that they could not hear it anymore. And on the fourth question, Ramona Fierro turned around. She had never done that. In 15 years she had heard that sound approximately 10,000 times, and she had never once turned around and looked at it. She had always looked down. Ray asked her a question and she answered it, and then she turned her head and looked at her husband, and she stood there and watched him do it with no sound coming out, and she put her hand over her own mouth. Then she said something the microphone barely caught, and they put the subtitle on it when it aired, because everybody needed it. She said, "Oh, honey, the Fierro family won that game by 31 points, and I promise you nobody in that building could have told you the score." Before Fast Money, Ray Calloway did one more thing, and it was the hardest ask of the afternoon. He walked back over to Tommy, and he said, "They can hear you now. And before your wife goes up there, I want you to say a word for me. One word. You know which one." Tom's Fierro stood there for a long time. His son said later that his father had never said it. Not at the hospital, not to the insurance people, not at his own mother's kitchen table. He said, "Stroke." Just that. One word, out loud, 16 years late, in front of 200 strangers. His daughter Andy came apart. Her brother had to hold her up. Fast Money, Tommy went first, and he was useless. He was crying so hard he could not get his answers out on time, and he came out of there with 74 points and 3 zeros, and he said, "I'm sorry, Mama," and Fetutuya Sosopo hollered it's okay. Papa from the other podium and got the biggest laugh of the day. Ramona Fierro needed 126 points by herself. She went to that podium, and she did the thing she had been doing for 16 years. She said each answer once in her head first. And for the first time in 16 years, that was not a symptom. It was a strategy, and it is the reason she got what she got. She had 100 points with one question left. She needed 26. That is a number that requires the number 1 or number 2 answer on the board, and everybody watching knew it. Ray Calloway read the question, "Name something you'd miss the most if you lost it." And Ramona Fierro, the voice of the Lea County Fair, said my voice. Number 2 answer, 26 points. 200 exactly. Not 1 point over. 200 on the nose, which is the exact number you have to have, and the board did that thing where it climbs and stops, and the studio came down. Now here is what happened afterward, because that is the part I actually care about. He did not stop laughing. That has to be said, because everybody assumed the show fixed it, and it did not fix it, and it was never going to. Tom's Fierro is 69 years old, and there is a thing that happens in his chest when his wife talks, and it has been happening since a Tuesday in October of 2011, and it is going to keep happening until one of them is buried. She does not want it fixed. That is the part that surprised everybody, including her daughter. What changed is where he sits. He used to stand behind her. At church, at the shop, at every birthday party in Lea County for 47 years, Tommy Fierro stood behind his wife, because that is what he thought a man did. Now he sits where she can see him, every time. He will move a chair across a room to do it. Because the whole thing was never the sound, it was that she could hear it and could not see his face. And a laugh you can't see the face of is just noise. And noise will fill in with whatever you are most afraid of. He says the word now too. In November their granddaughter had to interview a family member for a school project, and she picked her grandpa. And he sat at that kitchen table and said the word about 9 times in 20 minutes. And afterward he went out to the shop and stayed out there a while. In April, Ramona Fierro went back to calling bingo. Thursday night at the Knights of Columbus Hall on Turner Street. That hall holds about 140 people. They had over 300. And they had the doors open, and there were people standing in the parking lot in the dark listening through the doors. Halfway through the third game she got stuck. She had the ball in her hand and the word would not come. And she held up one finger. And 300 people in a hot room did not move. Not a chair, not a cough, not a single person in that town filling in the word for her. 12 seconds. Then she said, under the B12, and the hall came up out of its seats like somebody had won something. And she let them go for about 4 seconds. And then she leaned into that microphone and said, in the voice that whole county grew up on, all right, that's enough. Talk amongst yourselves like normal people. I'm not a miracle. I'm a bingo caller. That town has not shut up about it since. Her son Jake, who works a workover rig, and who has said maybe 400 words to his mother since 1998, drove in off a job that night, with the mud still on him, and stood in the back of that hall for the last 3 games. He did not say anything to her about it afterward. But he calls her now on Sundays, and he does not have anything to say, and he calls anyway, and she says the two of them can go 4 minutes without either one of them saying a word, and it is the best 4 minutes of her week. The $20,000 mostly went where money goes at that age, the shop, the roof, a little for the grandkids, but $1,100 of it went to a new headset and a mixing board for the announcer's booth at the Lea County Fairgrounds, because in August of this year, for the first time since 2009, Ramona Fierro announced the fair. 4 days. Barrel racing, mutton busting, the whole thing. Tommy Fierro sat in the grandstand where she could see him. Front row, dead center, all 4 days, so that every time that big laugh of his came up over the rail she could look down and see what it was. Something else happened that they did not plan for. Speech therapists started showing that 11 minutes of silent laughing in aphasia support groups all over the country. Not the reveal, the silent part. Because the thing that room learned in 11 minutes is the thing every one of those families is trying to learn, that when a person loses their words, everybody around them starts communicating in noises and guesses, and everybody starts assuming, and nobody asks. A therapist in Ohio wrote the family a letter that Mona keeps in her purse. It said that she has started every new group for the last year with one question, and the question is, what does your person do that you have never asked them about? Ray Calloway has been asked about the Fierros more than about anything else he ever taped. He always says the same thing. I stopped that show because I thought I was about to catch a man being ugly to his wife. What I caught was a man who loved her so much he couldn't say it, laughing about it for 15 years while she stood there thinking it was about her. Y'all got a sound in your house. Everybody does. Somebody sighs, somebody laughs, somebody goes quiet at the table. And I guarantee you every person in that house has decided what it means, and not one of them has ever asked. Ask. It costs you nothing, and you might be about 11 years wrong. So that's the Fierros. If this got you anywhere, hit that like button and subscribe, because we do one of these every week, and I'd hate for you to miss the next one. And in the comments, do me one thing. Tell me about somebody whose voice you would know anywhere. Just their name and who they were to you. Your mother, your grandpa, your wife, the lady who called bingo in your town. Somebody out there is reading these, and there's a good chance they've been talking themselves into being quiet. Go tell them you can hear them.